levels too.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions for Brandon regarding the legislation and/or regulation updates? Okay. Thank you, Brandon. Kent, do we want to go with our presentation?
Yeah. Happy to have Leon Kaufman from USGS here today. He presented on this topic, which is focused on the aquifers in New Jersey's coastal plain at sort of the beginning stages of this project that he was working on. He gave a presentation to council, so he's here today to sort of give you a summary of the recent report that was published. Leon, please feel free to take it away. Welcome.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so the title of my presentation here, it's the title of the report, is Simulated Effects of Projected 2014 to 2040 Withdrawals on Groundwater and Flow and Water Levels in the New Jersey Coastal Plain. And so this is, based basically on these two reports, so that, really the one I'm going to be talking from today and the figures you'll see are from this report over here on the left. But that report in itself is based on this other report that was, Allison Gordon and Glenn Carlton did this work on updating the regional groundwater flow model, for the period up to 2013. So, we're kind of lagging in time a little bit, but then this follow-on work took and used projections that Rutgers and others worked on to kind of look at things into the future. So, and the focus really here is on confined aquifers. And so I'll just give you a little review of that. I'm not sure the backgrounds that everybody has here. Probably most people are familiar with these aquifers, but I'll just kind of touch on some things here. So really we're looking at the southern half of the state, so basically the part here in gray on this middle map here is the area we're looking at. This cross section shows, kind of where the aquifers are. So there's a couple, purely unconfined aquifers, and that would be the Holly Beach water bearing zone and the Kirkwood Cohansey aquifer system. Then there's 4 aquifers that you could consider, kind of confined throughout their extent, and that's the Cohansey Sand, the Rio Grande water bearing unit, the Atlantic City 800-foot sand, and the Piney Point. And so the Cohansey and the Atlantic City 800-foot sand, if you look at the little diagram here, I mean, they're kind of connected to the Kirkwood Cohansey, where the other ones are, the Piney Point and the Rio Grande are more isolated. At least in this cross section. And then the remaining aquifers are, mostly confined, but they do outcrop. And so, that includes the Vincent Town, the Winona Mount Laurel, the English Town, and then the Potomac Raritan Magathie, which is divided into an upper, middle, and lower parts in places, and then other places it's really undifferentiated. One of the other things that I'll touch on a little bit here is that I'm sure you're mostly aware of is these critical areas that, so back in the late 80s, early 90s, these areas were established to reduce flows in some of these confined aquifer areas where they were really having problems with, overuse, and it was starting to induce saltwater intrusion in places and just other areas. And so the pumping was restricted, and there was other water sources, a lot surface water sources, were kind of brought in to supplement that. Some of the pumping went to shallower aquifers such as the Kirkwood Cohansey, but so in the north, those restrictions in flow were the bottom 5 aquifers that you see here. So starting at the Winona Mount Laurel, the English Town, the 3 PRM aquifers. And then the one in the south, the critical area 2, I believe just the restrictions there just applied to the 3 Potomac Raritan Magathie aquifers. So just to talk a little bit about what we did. So, what we call the base simulation was from the original New Jersey coastal plain model that you'll see me abbreviate NJCP here. That model, went a little bit earlier than this, but it's really meant to look at the years from 1980 to 2013. In comparing the scenarios here, which the end of the scenarios, we go to 2040. We use that final stress period of that model. The withdrawals in that model are based on the reported data. And then, so to take off on that, and really the gist of this work that we're talking about now was to look at these different water use scenarios. And so there's 3 different scenarios that we run simulations for in the work. The first 2 of these are based on analysis by Diane Van Abs and others at Rutgers University. They considered population and migration trends, potential changes in water per capita demand. And so kind of what we ended up, they had some where the demand really didn't change, but, the scenarios that were selected were what you see here. And so, it was basically based on water conservation and technology improvements. And so the residential use, the per capita demands were reduced by 10%. The commercial use kind of tracked that and was also reduced for 10%. And then the agricultural and industrial wells weren't changed. So they basically are held constant through this time period. And really what separates the 2 scenarios that we ended up using was water loss in the delivery system. So the first one, which we call the nominal water loss scenario, basically assumes that the current median values from the systems that reported on water loss would hold. And so in this case, the large and medium systems have about a 10% loss, and then the smaller systems have a little more than that with a 13% loss in delivery. So, you need that much extra water over your water demand. And then in the optimal water loss scenario, it assumes that all systems would meet the performance of the best systems that are reporting now. And so the numbers that they used there were 5% water loss for all systems. So, combining these water loss variables with, the projections of population change and per capita water demand change, they came up with basically a value for each well, how that would change over time. Then the third scenario would be, I guess, kind of a worst case scenario is if everybody pumped at their full allocation that they're currently allotted through the Bureau Water Allocation. And so that was based on data in May of 2021. And so this graph here just shows a sum of all the wells across the whole coastal plain. This is how things look. And so the yellow dots here would be what's been used over time. So these are based on reported levels, and were included in the NJCP model. And then the 3 simulations are what you see here, in the colors. And so the nominal water loss, so that's kind of the, I guess, as is for the delivery systems. It's pretty consistent across there. So, there's some improvements, with water capacity or per capita demand, but, it's balanced by increasing population or whatever. But, for the most part, both these water loss scenarios are pretty flat over time. Certainly given the variability over time, they kind of fit in that. Obviously the optimal water loss scenario is a little better, but there's not a whole lot of difference. And then in the gray here, you see the full allocation scenario, which causes a pretty big jump. If everybody was to pump what they're allocated. So this is now looking kind of at just the nominal water loss scenario. So that, this is maybe you could say is the most likely. But then it's splitting it up by aquifers. So you'll see, you know, there's differences in whether they're going up or down and how they've gone over time in the past, you know, by aquifer. So, you know, the most water is pumped out of the unconfined Kirkwood Cohansey. You know, that wasn't a real big focus in the work we did, but you know, it's there, and it would increase a little bit over time, the usage, according to these projections. The next in the highest use, and if you combine these together, you know, they exceed what the Kirkwood Cohansey does, and that's the 3 PRM aquifers. You see there's slight increases under these scenarios for the middle and upper, but then the lower continues to decline. And in all three of these, you know, really probably based on the critical area restrictions. I mean, there's been declining. I mean, there was certainly a sharp decline when those restrictions were put in place, and, you know, they've kind of bounced around and maybe are trending down, you know, even in that case. You know, even after, you know, like in the 2000s, they've been going down a little bit. So you can see some of the other aquifers, the 800-foot sand would stay pretty steady under the scenario. Then these ones over on the right, you know, that's basically the ones that fit down here at the bottom between 0 and 5,000. And so, you know, there's a mix there. The Piney Point declines a little bit. The Winona Mount Laurel goes up a little bit. The other are pretty flat. And so just to kind of look at the full allocation scenario, this plot here just looks at the percent of full allocation that's projected to be withdrawn in the year 2040. And so, you know, I just took the sums from 2040 and divided them by the full allocation amount for each of the aquifers. And so the one thing you see here is that, you know, the places that are really not using a lot of that full allocation are mostly in the unconfined aquifers. And the Rio Grande is also included there, I guess. Whereas, you know, like the PRM aquifers, they're pumping, you know, much closer to their full allocation. And probably if you went in the critical areas themselves, I mean, these numbers would be even higher. But it kind of gives you a sense of by aquifer how much of that full allocation number is being used or is projected to be used in the future. So in the report, I mean, it's a very detailed report and can be, I guess, kind of tedious to move through. There's a lot of maps in there. There's a lot of tables. And so I'll just kind of summarize and show some examples here. And if you really care about one particular aquifer, you can go find the report and look it up. If you're really concerned, you could go download the data release and get the model and run it yourself. But so what we present in the report, there's maps of heads and drawdowns. We came up with these hydrologic budget areas. And so each aquifer was divided into different parts, and this probably isn't worded very well, but there's 44 areas in total across the 9 confined aquifers. 27 of those areas are in confined parts of the aquifers, and then 17 are in the unconfined parts of the aquifers. We summed inflows and outflows for various components for each one of these budget areas. So looking at flow from the units above, flow from below, from adjacent units, so kind of laterally from areas offshore. And then there's, you know, we keep track of how much of the flow is going to wells, how much came or is going to or from the rivers. That's really for the unconfined areas. How much is coming from recharge, again, for the unconfined. And then if there's water coming in and out of storage over time. We looked at trends in withdrawals and heads. And then there was some work done on the Huck 11s. And so really looking at flows into and out of the confined aquifers and sums of withdrawals in the confined aquifers by Huck 11. So that's just an example of, you know, looking at some of the trends over time. And so this HBA is kind of the northern part of the middle PRM, so up in Monmouth and Middlesex County, Ocean County, maybe a little bit. And so looking at the withdrawals over time, you can see there was a big drop off here corresponding to the critical area restrictions, and then it's, fairly constant over time. And then these are the three scenarios where you see a little bit of increase, under the two, what we call the water loss scenarios. The full allocation is just flat, but it's, a jump because they're not using the full allocation right now. And then I do, since the report was coming a little bit after the 2013 or 2014, I continued to plot the actual reported water unit or water use a little bit after that time. You can see it's kind of going up and down around the lines. Maybe COVID affected the dip here a little bit. And then on the plot to the right, you can see here we plot, this is the model result. So it's the heads in all the cells that are part of the model. And you can see, and then the green is the median for the whole area. The red is the 10th percentile, so kind of the lowest heads in the model. And then the minimum head, so the minimum cell. So this would kind of be the worst place in the aquifer is shown there. And so you do see that, that there was some initial declines as the head or the pumping was increasing kind of in the early time. But then once the restrictions were in place, the heads recovered, especially in the worst areas, they came up. But then they have kind of gone back down a little bit. It maybe as the pumping gets moved around and shuffled, and some of this could be areas outside the critical areas where pumping can increase a little bit. But anyway, these plots exist for each of the 27 areas that we looked at. This is just a picture of the head maps and again, this is just for the middle PRM. You can see when you look at this, there's a lot of similarity between the nominal water loss and the optimal water loss. And in this case, even the full allocation doesn't look a whole lot worse. For some of the aquifers, there's quite a dramatic change if you go to the full allocation scenario. I mean, you do see a little bit more area in the -20 contour here that you wouldn't have seen before. But so these, again, these maps exist for each of the 9 aquifers. And this next plot is kind of where I tried to summarize a little bit what was going on across all these different confined aquifers. And so, what I'm plotting here is a box plot. So it's, you can see the explanation over here. The box is, kind of the middle of the data from the 25th to the 75th. The whiskers kind of show out to the, range beyond that. And then, if there's more extreme values, they're shown as dots here. And so, one of the things I was thinking about in making this plot was that heads below 0 is, in a sense, kind of an indicator of vulnerability because it's below sea level. And so you could induce saltwater intrusion. But it should also be noted that, you kind of have to get that to pump water out of these aquifers. So, it's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it does kind of show that there's some vulnerability to the systems. And when you look through here, all of the aquifers have at least some area with heads below 0. And some of them, almost all the water is. So like the Rio Grande is an example that it really doesn't have a good connection to the unconfined aquifer. So it's, it's not terribly surprising. All the PRM aquifers kind of look the same, where at least the whole box is underneath that 0. And so there's, kind of shows that the water levels are, even though they've recovered a lot, they're still fairly low in those aquifers. Some of the other ones, like the Vincent Town, you could look at it, it's pretty minor, but it's well above 0 in most of its extent. So then the other way we looked at things with a map, this would be a map of the simulated head change. So take the head that's simulated in 2040 and subtract the head in 2013. So, this is a picture of drawdown. And so where these values are negative means there's continued drawdown. The blue areas would be above zero. So that's where the aquifer continues to recovery. And so, again, in this case, for the middle PRM, up here in the northern part, there's still some drawdown that it would be continuing to happen under the scenarios that are there. And I think a lot of it is from, this one cluster of wells. It's kind of right at the edge of the critical area, and whether they're actually in or out, this line's approximate. So, they may have allowed some increases there that, maybe would or wouldn't happen. But because of that, there is some continued drawdown, but it's for the most part away from the coast and the places where you might induce saltwater intrusion. But you can see then in the full allocation scenario, there's even, that drawdown becomes even more. And so again, when you look at different aquifers, you're going to see varying amounts of that. And so I did a similar type of plot to the other ones for the drawdowns. And that, that's what you see here. So again, each of the aquifers has their own plot. Here, the way that the numbers are positive means that, the water level is going down. Negative means recovery. So, that's a good thing. So like, for example, in the Piney Point, where the pumping is trending downward, there's recovery happening in some, but, then in other places, it's going down a little bit. Especially in the middle and lower PRM, we see a lot of that recovery continue to happen. And I think especially down, in the Camden area is where you see a lot of this. That's where the lower is, but the middle also is going down there. But, you go to full allocation, that bumps up a little bit. You can see for a lot of them, most of the aquifer would be kind of right around zero, but there are these extremes, and, and they tend to be where the wells are. So where, right around the wells, there can be some pretty severe drawdowns that would continue to happen if, things really played out like that, and the model is exactly right in terms of the hydraulic conductivities that are simulated. Yeah, and so just this one, I'm just going to show an example of what these budgets look like for each one. Basically for each of these budget areas, we say, where's the water coming from, which would be the top part of this graph. And then, the different bars are the different simulations. And then where's it going to? So like in this case, almost all the water is going to the wells. It's coming in from the overlying confining layer. So it's moving downward, kind of across the aquifer, and then coming in, smaller amounts coming in laterally from the other budget areas that it's adjacent to. So the one that's 44 would be the unconfined areas. So that's the biggest amount. But then there's a little bit that's coming from the south in HBA 19, then some that's coming from offshore. And some of that offshore would be coming from an area that's kind of flagged as being higher chloride area. So, this would be a little bit of concern. And so again, you can look at these, see where that's happening, which of these budget areas that's happening. And again, there could be issues where that kind of thing is being shown there. And so again, this is just kind of example. I mean, there would be 40 some of these plots in the report. So if there's a particular area you're concerned about, I guess you could look there. I think I'll stop there. I think the overall message, I meant to have a summary slide, but I guess I didn't get it put in here. I think for the most part, there's really, especially the two most likely scenarios don't show a lot of change. Maybe there's some particular places, and it could be a quirk of the model where there's, a lot of drawdown right around a particular well, but that may be that the model's not calibrated well in that particular area. I think for the most part, when you're looking at, is the coastal plain aquifers, is it a good or bad story? I think it's pretty good. I mean, there's some continued recovery happening. There's not any big places of wild drawdown, especially if you don't go to the full allocation scenario. For some of these aquifers, when you go to full allocation, there would be a lot of drawdown. But for the most part, I think the story is pretty good. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. And if there's questions, I guess I can try to address them.
Thanks, Leon. That's great to hear a nice summary of what is a very detailed report. So appreciate you coming today and giving that for everybody that may or may not be able to dig into it. I just want to point out we often nearly always look at full allocation for planning purposes, but it really is a fairly unlikely scenario that everyone's going to be operating at full allocation at the same time. So as Leon was saying, the other two options are much more likely to be how things are operated. But with that, just turn it over council first for any questions, council and advisors for Leon.
Don?
Yeah, thanks, Leon. Great report. This is super interesting. A lot of great detail in here. Just a couple of quick things that made a couple of notes on the. I noticed that you had some water loss management type and conservation type stuff for residential, commercial. Any reason you didn't apply anything to agricultural or industrial in terms of technology?
I mean, that really wasn't my decision.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
I'm not sure what the answer is there. I mean, I thought about that when I was going through, but
you want me to help
sure.
with that, Leon?
It's probably.
I can help because I think we supplied you with those estimates that we had gotten from Dan Van Abs, who had done that work, specifically looking at the public water supply sector. So that's really what we had. You'll recall with the plan with respect to industry, we kind of kept it constant. Same with commercial. So that's part of the reason why, public water supply is like 80% of the makeup throughout the state, roughly. And that's where we had the best data and scenarios to apply.
Understood. Cool. Thank you, Kent.
Yeah, no worries.
I do have a couple other questions that really around anything related to the salt concentrations or chloride, any kind of the intrusion. I know you're just really focused on levels and head here, but was there any consideration on, did the report go into any detail on that?
I mean, other than having, these plots here that kind of show how much flow, and that would be to the whole budget area is coming from areas that are, kind of outside the isochlors, so for each aquifer we had, a contour that is the 250 milligram per liter chloride line. And then, so if flow was being pulled from across that, it's flagged in these plots.
Okay.
But even that, just means it's coming in a little bit at the edges. It doesn't necessarily mean it's coming to the wells.
Yeah. That's what I get. Is there almost a detailed well evaluation? It doesn't sound like there is, but it could you interpolate, at least at a very high level, when you're looking at a series of wells that you have along the spine of along the Delaware River? Can we start to interpolate? I know where we know we have issues, but it's the ones on the fringes that that are concerning. So
yeah, and there's none of the areas except I think there's one or two areas. So there's one that's in the middle PRM that's actually outside the line. So the whole budget area is on the outside of the line. So obviously that's kind of an area that it's already known that there's an issue there.
Exactly.
And then I think there's another one in the Atlantic 800-foot sand or something, where it's the same deal.
Yep.
Down in Cape May, but those are kind of known areas.
Right.
I mean, there didn't seem to be, and again, this is kind of an analysis that's at a scale maybe bigger than what you're really interested in.
Yeah,
I would mention that we're
ahead,
currently working on a project in the Raritan Bay where we're simulating that for, you know, some particular wells up there.
Yep.
And, you know, there's other work going on kind of along the Delaware Bay as well that USGS is doing, and I'm sure other people as well.
Yeah.
But this report doesn't, I mean, it doesn't flag it as a huge issue kind of from a big scale perspective, but
that's kind of
certainly there could be wells where that could be an issue.
Yeah. I mean, was it the macro big trend over time? Was it something that was like, oh my God, this is, you know, we're because when you compare that with the drawdown, the scenarios, and Steve, I know you've got your hand up. I still got a couple other questions I'd love to just poke Leon here for just a minute. In terms of vulnerability and then quantification of what is vulnerability, are we just looking at that in terms of excessive drawdown or rate of change in drawdown? How do we characterize vulnerability in terms of, you know, threat? What is the actual threat? Is it just low level? I'm just trying to think through what that is. You know, again, we've had a lot of recovery. It's fairly well stable at this point, it looks like. But is there, you know, how do we define vulnerability in terms of this report?
Yeah, and we didn't really necessarily quantify that other than, you know, I just kind of mentioned that, you know, if the water level is below zero, it's, you know, just a very rough, I guess, thing saying that, you know, it could be a problem. But on the other hand, I mean, you kind of expect that, you know, and especially in the interior of the coastal plain, even that's not really a problem because, you know, you're far enough away from the salt, you're not going to draw it in. But it just, you know, it just shows that it's used and it's, you know, the water levels are kind of depressed from what would be natural, you know. So if it was natural, all that would be above land surface because all, you know, the water table would kind of govern that. So, you know, and you know, when you look at these budgets, you can see places where the wells are kind of the main outflow of the system. And so, you know, those areas are going to be probably the areas you want to keep an eye on because, you know, you're really perturbing the system, you know, kind of out of a natural thing. And so, you know, that's where you're.
That I mean, when I hear vulnerability and threat, I think of, you know, California and they're in that central, you know, that growing area where they pulled, you know, subsidence has gone down 30 feet, right? Where they're literally pulling land level down because of over pumping. That for me, that's a threat. I don't see, you know, that kind of analysis here, but again, it's a macro trend over time. Are we seeing anything in those terms? I'm not seeing it here. So.
There's always potential for subsidence here, but I think it's probably much less than what's going on there. Yeah, I think there has been some work done in Atlantic City where they've seen a little bit of subsidence, but again, it's not a big problem. And, you know, maybe my use of threat or something wasn't a very good term.
No, yeah, this is great work. This is really, it's just great to see it, and look forward to digging into a little bit more. So great work. Thank you. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just raising my hand and waiting. When you talk about the full allocation, I mean, we talked about the scenarios for residential and some commercial. But from what I remember, agricultural has pretty good amounts of allocation, especially in the PMR areas. And, you know, from what I remember, you know, they're not really close to using a lot of those. And I was wondering, has any thought been given to, you know, looking at this rather than keeping the full allocation and taking a look at that to some degree? Dave, I don't know if you were going to mention that or not, but that was my question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that may be more a question for Kent than me. I don't know. You know, I just kind of went with what I was given, but you're right that, I mean, a lot of those areas where the full allocation isn't, you know, even close. I mean, some of those aquifers, you know, it's 30% or something. And I think a lot of that probably is from the ag because it's more of a as needed thing, you know. So if you're getting lots of rain, then you don't need it pumped. it just costs money. And so, so there's a balance there. And so I imagine that's part of it.
Yeah. One thing I would just chime in on that most of the ag diversions are not going to be in your confined PRM aquifers for the most part. And just also, I would point back to the water supply plan. I think you'll remember one of the areas we outlined 2 regions for further planning work, and one that was focused on ag was in that southwestern region. So certainly, yep, we will be digging into that issue in a couple different ways, one of which is probably what you articulated, Steve.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And I would say along that too, what Bob was mentioning earlier, I mean, that probably is where it really comes down to is, the stream flows and stuff, so it's kind of a different set of issues with water use in those unconfined aquifers that this report didn't really get at. But
yeah,
certainly in terms of the ecological health of the streams, I mean, it could be something to look into.
Dave, I think you have your hand up.
I did actually have a question for Leon. Leon, thanks for your presentation as well. It was very interesting and a lot of information to take in for sure. I was wondering, in 1 or 2 slides, you had mentioned something about the head level. What is that?
So just the the water table essentially is what and so in confined aquifers, so if it's an unconfined aquifer, so if there's no clay or whatever above it, it's just when you drill down and you get to the water level, that's what we call head, is the level that the water rises to. Okay. And so if it's a confined layer where there's clay and stuff on top of it, you can push. I mean, you can pump enough where it kind of dips it down, because you need suction to get that water to flow to your well. And so,
right.
It's essentially a measure of, if you put a well in and measure in that well the water level, I mean, that's the altitude of that is what we would refer to as head.
Yeah, okay, that's kind of what I thought it was. And actually on our farm, we were in the critical water use area number 2, and I think we're in the middle PRM aquifer for one of our wells. So we drilled down at 230 feet, but yet the head level is somewhere around 52. Does the level of the head level vary during the season? Like over a year, does it go down in the summer and come back up again, or is it pretty consistent?
No, it would probably, I mean, especially if you're pumping irrigation wells, you would expect that it's going to go down when it's being pumped, or
right.
most heavily in the summer, and then it'll recover a bit in the fall and winter as that now you're not taking water out. It just kind of allows the water to move and those levels to come back up. These models were really based on a yearly time step, so you don't necessarily see that annual fluctuation, interannual fluctuation in the models, but it certainly happens in your aquifers. So I would expect that. But it might be 52. Sometimes it could go down to 60 or 70 and then come back up and be higher than that in the this winter or spring.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I'm not sure who raised their hand.
Looks like Gina Berg from Pinelands.
Go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Oh.
Yep, got it. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. I just want to verify my understanding of the scenarios, particularly relative to the unconfined aquifers. The scenarios, as I remember Dan Van Ab's presentation, they did not look at wells withdrawing less than 100,000 gallons per day. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, so these are only the wells that are big wells and that are pumping enough that they're actually in the model. So like domestic wells, we don't even have in our models because the amount they pump is pretty small compared to, all the water moving around.
So
I think there may be, I'm not sure what the exact cutoff level was, but it's just the big wells are where these
right.
things are being.
So on the full allocation scenario, did that incorporate smaller wells?
Yeah,
like the
I think
50,000 gallon per day certifications or the innumerable private wells?
No,
Well,
it's gonna
again,
be
the
the same.
private wells aren't in the model,
Yep.
but any
I
well
thought maybe they
that
were in the
pumps enough to be in
full
the model.
allocation.
No, and there could be areas where they're important and maybe they should be. But again, when you're thinking of it from the unconfined aquifers, this New Jersey coastal plain model really isn't adequate to address the unconfined systems. That layer is in the model, but it's crude at best. And so, they're big cells. And so you really can't adequately, represent the streams and the wetlands and everything that's going on at the land surface. This really isn't the model. So, USGS has certain places where they have more detailed models, and really that would be the place to look at the unconfined areas. And so in the analysis that was done in this paper, it was really focused on the confined areas of this coastal plain.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else?
My old pal Vince is on.
Yeah, Vince got a hand up.
Good
Okay,
morning,
Vince.
everyone. Great presentation, and I'm glad I decided to join in. A question for Leon. I know you mentioned the isochlor, and I know USGS really uses isochlor quite a bit. Was sodium included in that? And are there isosodium, if there's such term, in the report?
No. Really,
the reason I say that is in a number of areas from past experience, you see sodium creep up a lot more quickly than the chloride. And New Jersey does look at sodium. And there is a good reason for it. Was just wondering.
Yeah, this report really didn't focus on that, so we use these and it was just chloride. There's no sodium, lines, and they were based on another report. So it wasn't even like we were analyzing it in this particular piece of work. We were just using work that was done and out there.
I understood. And again, from experience, there are some very localized wells as they pump. There's up coning, and basically you're bringing sodium from the bottom, and then while your water level may change, it gives you a chance to rest. It's not going to back down that quickly. Just a comment, but thank you very much. It's still very informative.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Vince. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Why don't we move on? Again, Leon, thank you for your presentation.
Yep, no problem.
Kent, do you want to bring us up to date on the water supply plan?
Sure. Yeah. It's a brief one today. So everybody knows the plan was out as of September 23rd. Once again, thank you all. Big undertaking that you all helped us with to get that over the finish line. So it is out. We also got out the comment and response summary at the same time, as well as we went live with a sort of digital version of the plan. which is it's called a story map collection. It's a bunch of story maps that go through all the critical pieces of the plan as one experience that you can scroll through and then take a deeper dive on certain topics if you would like. We do want to give you sort of an overview of that product. I think that might be something that we maybe would like to put on the agenda for next month. We wanted to have Leon give his presentation. But Dan Hoy led that charge in getting that product put together. So if council's interested, we'd like to do a demo of that. In the meantime, I will note that for you as well as everyone else that's on the call, I'm just going to share my screen briefly. This is our water supply plan page where you can get to all the chapters of the plan itself, appendices, response to comment, but you also have the opportunity to get to this story map as well if you want to check it out before we give you a demo next month. So that's where we're at with the plan. Currently, we're starting to look at next steps, where we go from here. Obviously, you heard about some things today, and we'll be keeping you abreast of where we go from here.
All right. Any questions for Kent?
Just a comment, Steve, Kent, and teams. I know Steve Domber's on and other folks in DEP. Just another. I know you've probably heard it a few times, but just a huge thank you and congratulations on getting this thing out. It was a huge effort and very well done. I had a chance to take a quick look at the storyboard when it first came out, and that, from a public reception perspective, or just keeping it easy to understand, that was really well done. So just thank you. Good work.
Thanks very much for that, Don. And we felt strongly about getting that story map out at the same time. To be honest, there was certain elements to it that we want to include, and that's what we hope to keep as sort of a living, breathing document moving forward. And we'll talk about some of that next month, areas where we plan to develop it further. But we did want to get it out there with the plan at the same time, try to help with understanding. So thanks very much.
Yeah, ditto on the congrats. I'm going through the storyboard right now, and it looks phenomenal.
Thank you. Well, that's all I had today. So we can do some more next month, but just a brief one for you today.
All right. Thanks, Kent. Future Water Supply Advisory Council meetings and other meetings. So I know you have 2 of our meetings for the rest of this year listed below. So we'll keep those as is. Do we have any other meeting updates?
I do not. I don't know if any of the folks that also sit on the Clean Water Council or DWQI have anything they want to update. I don't have anything at this time.
No, I've not been able to attend the last 1 or 2 Clean Water Council meetings because of conflicts.
All right, well, keep it
And I'll
posted.
weigh in similarly with Jen. I haven't been able to make those, but they do have their public hearing coming up. I'm not sure of the date.
Okay, thanks, Chris. All right, I guess next, new publications. Do we have anything?
That is typically for Alex Fior. I know Alex is on today. Go ahead, Alex.
Yes, and I do have something. It's actually not a publication, but a tool that might be of people's interests that the USGS recently released. So we previously had a tool called Groundwater Watch, which looks at our continuous network of groundwater levels. So we have continuously recording recorders in wells all over New Jersey, collecting water levels at 15-minute intervals, and it kind of gave some statistics about whether it's above normal, below normal, etc. And so that went away a few years ago, and we recently released a replacement for that. And I'll share my screen and show it to you. So this is what it looks like, New Jersey groundwater levels and trends. I can also put this link in the chat for everybody if you'd like to look at it. So you can zoom in, so where all of the locations of our wells are located. You can sort by county, sort by which wells are below normal, above normal, etc., and by national aquifer. So that's the large physiographic province, really, is what that refers to. And so we have a chart that kind of lists all of those wells and their status as well. And so if you click on each of the dots, so it gives you kind of the name and some details about it. If you were to click the open detailed site page, it takes you to a new page. I already clicked it off, so because it kind of takes a minute to load sometimes, so I didn't want to make you wait. And you can see some additional statistics about that particular well and where the water levels are falling this year compared to previous years. And these are all wells where we have at least 10 years worth of data in order to compute these monthly statistics for, and you can see kind of where everything is falling within these. And this also links to the main page that has all of the water levels that are downloadable. If you go to the open monitoring page, takes you to our new National Water Information System database to download all of this data as well. So pretty neat little tool there. And that's all I had to show for today.
Thank you. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Alex.
Okay. Anything else for anything new?
Just Steve, to
Any
follow
other
up on the
board
Clean Water Council. The Clean Water Council public hearings December 10th, and its topic is PFAS.
December 10th. All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Anything else? Any other comments from the council before I turn it over to public comment? All right. Seeing or hearing none. Anybody from the public like to comment at this time? All right. I don't see anything. So at this point, I think we're done. If somebody would like to make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All right, everyone. Thanks for attending today, and have a nice weekend. And maybe we'll get some rain by the time we meet again next time. So
That'd be nice.
fingers and toes crossed. And Kent, thanks for a great meeting. And Leon, thanks for a nice presentation. So
Yeah, it's good to
all right,
see
everyone.
everyone.
Have a good one, everyone. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.